O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fill us all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O gracious one. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Let's talk about Justin Welby and the liturgy that took place recently in Rome. A lot of people have asked for me to comment on it, so I'm going to do that today. Hey, but before I do it, let me remind you, hit that subscribe button. Help me reach more people with this content that you've been appreciating. Okay, and by the way, while you're at it, hit that like button too. Well, so yesterday I did that video with Sister Mary Eucharista, who is a former Sedevacantists who has become Catholic and, entered into full communion with the Catholic Church. And she gave her story, and it was incredibly awesome. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. I mean, just wow. Wow. I really enjoyed it. I was captivated the whole time. And I just thought that, wow, this is a story people really need to hear. And shortly after that, I get a text message from a viewer of the show, and they said something along the lines of, the Novus Ordo watch guy is going to be really mad or upset about this. And I'm like, why? and, and why does it even matter? And he said, oh, watch, he'll be really upset and he'll come out and say something against you. I'm like, okay, what else is new? But you know what? He was right. Shortly right after that, the Novus Ordo watch posted something, and let me share it on my screen. This is pretty hilarious. Pope Francis checkmates Michael Lofton by permitting invalid Anglican mass. I just had to laugh at that. I thought, okay, I must have really got to them. I guess that interview really struck a nerve, but okay. Well, you know what? This is a good teaching moment. This is pretty interesting because this demonstrates an inability to make very basic distinctions. And I will suggest to you, it is that exact reason why you have these people being Sedevacantists. If you are going to be a Sedevacantist, you suffer from an inability to make some basic theological distinctions. I'm sorry if that offends you, but that's the reality. And here we see it manifested in other places. Because what this assumes is somehow that everything the Pope does is absolutely impeccable. And of course, that's not my position. In any Catholic 101 course would teach you the Pope is not impeccable. I've criticized Pope Francis. I don't agree with everything Pope Francis does. And let's just say, with this particular case, Pope Francis permits an invalid Anglican mass. How's that a checkmate for me? It's not, because my position is not that Pope Francis is impeccable in everything that he does. My position is nuanced enough to sustain problems and even sins on parts of popes. Yes, we've had popes who were fornicators. We've had popes who did all kinds of horrible things. Yeah, my theology can account for that, because it's not this very shallow, unnuanced theology that thinks that, well, if he's Pope, he has to be impeccable. So again, this inability to make distinctions is what so many Sedevacantists suffer from, and you see it right here. So at the end of the day, even if any of this is true, my point is, so that doesn't touch on my position at all. And for anybody who knows me and knows my show, they know that I don't always agree with the Pope. I have criticized the Pope on occasions, and in a constructive way, and I'll continue to do so when necessary. But I also don't buy into lies and slander about the Pope. And when people disseminate lies and slander, such as Novus Ordo Watch, and I've documented that on this channel, which is probably why they're a little upset. When I have documented that before and pointed that out, I'm not going to go along with it. I'm not going to go along with the lies and slander. Just because I don't think that popes are perfect doesn't mean that I somehow now have license to lie about a pope. So if people are lying about him, misleading souls, saying things that are entirely not true, slandering the pope, and it's leading people astray, I will respond to that, as any good Catholic should. All right, so let's dive into the issue at hand. Let me share my screen. And of course, one of the most famous documents on the question is Apostolicae Curae on the nullity of Anglican Orders in 1896 by Pope Leo XIII. This is one of the most famous documents in this discussion between Catholics and Anglicans. And you have paragraph 36, where he says, wherefore, strictly adhering in this matter to the decrees of the pontiffs, our predecessors, and confirming them most fully, and, as it were, renewing them by our authority, and of our own initiative and certain knowledge, we pronounce and declare that ordinations carried out according to the Anglican rite have been and are absolutely null and utterly void. So he's saying that the ordinations that they have are null and void. So it's not just that they're illicit, it's that they're invalid, is what he's saying. And he's saying this has basically been the position of the Catholic Church, since the advent of the Anglican communion, and that's discussed in the document. Now, the commentary on the Professio Fidei, or commentary on the concluding paragraphs of the Professio Fidei, I should say, locates this, though it's not the commentary on the Professio Fidei is not magisterial. It is Ratzinger and Bertone's commentary on it, so it's important, and it certainly should not be disregarded, even if it's not magisterial. And they locate this as an example of what's called secondary objects of infallibility. Or second paragraph of the profession of faith, second paragraph teachings. And these are things that are not strictly in the deposit of faith, but are related to something in the deposit of faith, either by historical or logical necessity. And they give this as an example of a secondary object of infallibility. So Bertone and Ratzinger think that this is definitive in nature. There's some language from Leo XIII after this document, if I recall correctly, where he thinks that this is definitive in nature. There, are other comments after this that indicate it's definitive in nature. I think I've come across a few people who contest that it's definitive, but on the whole, I think most agree that this is definitive. And again, you can see Ratzinger and Bertone's commentary on the Professio Fidei that takes that position. So it should not be dismissed easily. Plus, I mean, you can kind of see the language. We pronounce and declare. It sounds pretty solemn, right? Not the same as define, because that would make it a primary object of infallibility, which would be impossible. But a secondary object, this is the language of a secondary object. Okay. So that's kind of the thing that we have been grappling with. Now, since then, there have been some questions as to whether or not there have been some changes in circumstances that would not overturn this document, but should be considered. We're going to take a look at some of those. But first, let's just kind of look at the controversy in question. This is put out by The Pillar. And it notes on January 25th, an Anglican Eucharist at Rome, Rome's San Bartolomeo Bartolomeo, a Catholic basilica located on Tiber Island and housing a shrine to the new martyrs on the 20th and 21st century, was held. So you have the Archbishop, Anglican Archbishop Justin Welby, celebrating his Anglican service in a Catholic church in Rome, and in fact, in a Catholic basilica. It goes on to note Welby presided and preached at the service, which was attended by both Anglicans and Catholics. According to Michael Haynes, take anything he says with a grain of salt, as you've seen from this channel. According to Michael Haynes, the senior Vatican correspondent of LifeSite News, the Anglican leader noted that Pope Francis had given permission for the service to be held at the church, which contains the relics of St. Bartholomew, one of Jesus's 12 apostles. So Welby says, hey, he had permission for this. And okay, I take him at his word. Like, I haven't seen anything where Pope Francis like issues some kind of official, communication or something. But if he says it, I mean, I take him at his word. He's at a Catholic basilica and he says that he's been given the permission from the Pope. Okay, again, I take him at his word. So a couple things going on here. Let's just say that this is the worst case scenario. Okay. It would just mean Pope Francis is wrong. Let's go even more worst case scenario. Let's go to the extent that Pope Francis personally believes that Apostolicae Curae is somehow not definitive in nature. Let's say he denies that. Okay. You would just simply argue he's wrong. By the way, that wouldn't even make him a heretic. You would have to deny a first paragraph teaching, not a second paragraph, to be a heretic. It would mean he's in error. As I've noted many times on the show, you can even go a step further than that. A pope can privately be a heretic. Pretty much everybody agrees. I don't really know anybody who would dispute that. Even Bellarmine, who takes a really, really high view of the papacy and doesn't believe that any pope would ever teach heresy. He does believe and did believe that a pope could materially be a heretic. But that's not even in scope here. So in other words, we can already grant something even more extreme than the worst case scenario here. But what are we saying? Pope Francis gave him permission to celebrate this. Number one, you're assuming that he somehow thinks that it's a valid mass. I'm going to show you something here in a moment that will put that into question and show you why he might still give him permission to do it, even if he doesn't think it's a valid mass. But again, let's just say he thinks it's a valid mass. Okay, popes can be wrong. That's not the same as teaching error. See, these are basic distinctions we have to learn to make. And if we don't make them, we'll end up becoming Sedevacantists like this Mario guy at Novus Ordo Watch. If you don't make basic distinctions, boy, church history is going to take you for a pretty wild ride. That's all I can say. So obviously there's a difference between teaching heresy and the Pope privately embracing heresy, or teaching error and the Pope privately embracing error. And also we have to check our assumptions. Are we assuming that he somehow thinks by granting permission to this that he thinks it's valid? Might he grant permission for it for other reasons? Actually, yes, that is a possibility. Let's take a look. A number of people have pointed out to me, and I've found it helpful, that there have been some factual changes in the situation with Anglicans since the time of 1896. Since that time, there has been an introduction of valid orders into Anglicanism, pockets of Anglicanism, through Old Catholics and also Eastern Orthodox. How widespread that has been is a different question. but some argue that it's actually become pretty prevalent. So the situation that Leo the 13th was analyzing, some would argue, is very different than today, because now you have this new phenomenon where some of these Anglican people have received orders from communions who do have valid apostolic succession and valid orders, such as Old Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. I'll just give you just one example of this, and that is most recently, we know of Calvin Robinson. Well, you look on his profile, he says Old Rite Orders or Old Catholic Orders. He received his orders through the Old Catholics, through that lineage. And therefore, he would have valid orders, it would seem. That doesn't mean that all Anglicans have that, right? We have to look on a case-by-case basis, but people have pointed out that, look, you can completely accept everything that Leo the 13th says, 100%, and still recognize that there has been a change in situation for some Anglicans due to this phenomenon. And you can even see this mentioned as early as 1978 by Cardinal Hume. He says, and so this is not something new to just now. This has been going on for a while and has, again, arguably been growing. He says, I could not in practice dismiss all Anglican orders as null and void, because I know that a number of Anglican bishops have, in fact, had the presence at their ordination of an Old Catholic or an Orthodox bishop. That's an Eastern Orthodox bishop. That is someone who in the traditional liturgy of our church has been ordained according to the valid rite. Now, he didn't believe that it was very common, and maybe in his time it wasn't in 1978. But again, some will point out, but it has become more common. So that introduces a new element into this discussion that we have to consider. Now, just kind of pointing out where this seems to have not been the first time that this has happened. It looks like this actually happened also under Pope Benedict, this situation with Welby. At the time, you had a different Anglican Archbishop, and he, in 2006, it's noted here in Whispers and Logia, November 26, 2006, that the Archbishop of Canterbury concluded his 6-day Roman visit with a festival Eucharist of Christ the King celebrated at the high altar of the Dominican Basilica of Saint Sabina, which I believe is also in Rome. Now, again, this was Archbishop Rowan Williams, the Anglican Archbishop at the time, before Welby. So it looks like this isn't the first time that this has happened. Did he have papal permission? We don't know. Don't know. In the other case that I've covered on this show, where you had some Anglicans celebrate at the St. John Lateran, it appears in that case Pope Francis was not directly involved, and there was a communication error. So a whole bunch of people have commented on that video and not exercising any kind of intelligence or reason. They've said, oh, see, this proves that they had permission from Pope Francis. That doesn't logically follow. If Welby had permission in this other instance, doesn't mean that these other priests had permission in this other instance, especially when the people are telling you, the people involved are telling you this was a communication error. It does not logically follow. Again, we have to exercise reason. If we just offer these knee-jerk reactions and irrational comments, we're not going to be taken seriously by anybody, nor should we. So I thought that was a little funny that people have tried to dunk on me with really bad argumentation, or in fact, no argumentation. So I stand by what I said before. And again, even in this particular case, doesn't do anything to my position. Sorry, guys. I know those of y'all who really, really don't like me were expecting this to somehow be a checkmate or a defeat for my position. It's not. It just means it's a checkmate for what you thought I believed because you were too lazy to actually pay attention to what I actually say. That's what it means. And now you're finding out, yeah, I never believed that the Pope was impeccable. Now you're starting to experience that cognitive dissonance. That's one of my specialties, by the way. Introducing cognitive dissonance to irrational people. It's one of the things I try to do. It helps bring them back to reality. Okay, so it seems like there have been instances where this has occurred in Rome before. Now, I want to share my screen. Take a look at this. I'm going to go to paragraph 137 of the Directory for the Application of Principles and Norms on Ecumenism with the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity. Let's go to, again, paragraph 137 and see what it says about this situation. Catholic churches are consecrated or blessed buildings, Catholic churches are consecrated or blessed buildings which have an important theological and liturgical significance for the Catholic community. They are therefore generally reserved for Catholic worship. However, if priests, ministers, notice that, not just priests, but even ministers, that could be somebody who does not have valid orders, or communities not in full communion with the Catholic Church do not have a place or the liturgical objects necessary for celebrating worthily their religious ceremonies, the diocesan bishop may allow them to use the use of a church or a church building and also lend them what may be necessary for their services. Under similar circumstances, permission may be granted for them for an interment or for the celebration of services as Catholic cemeteries. Now, in the case of Archbishop Rowan Williams, there were Anglican churches available, and I'm pretty sure Welby also had Anglican churches available to him in this situation as well. So this does not necessarily seem to be what applies, but it does show at the very least in cases where a person might not have access to a building, the church could allow for the use of its property, not only for priests, but even just ministers. And that would include people with invalid orders. Now, I want to also point out this. This is going to come from paragraph 51 to make it a little bit more complex. This is from Looking Towards a Church Fully Reconciled, the final report of the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission, which is not magisterial or anything, but it certainly does kind of show you where we're going. If you look at, let's see, page 60 of the document, paragraph 51, it notes a little bit more nuanced situation. It says, let me try to zoom in on this here. It's actually paragraph 50. In our conversations together, we have made two discoveries. First, that many of the preconceptions that we brought with us concerning each other's understanding of moral teaching and discipline were often little more than caricatures. And secondly, that the differences which actually exist between us appear in a new light when we consider them in their origin and context. Sorry, that's the wrong one. Let's see, it was page 60. I'm on the wrong paragraph. Let me go to it. I had it highlighted, but I moved. Hold on. Let's see. Here we go. There it is. Okay. Paragraph 51. One of the most important ways in which there has already been a sharing of gifts is in spirituality and worship. Roman Catholics and Anglicans now frequently pray together. Alongside common participation in public worship and in private prayer, members of both churches draw from a common treasury of spiritual writing and direction. There has been a notable convergence in our patterns of liturgy, especially in that of the Eucharist. The same lectionary is used by both churches in many countries. We now agree On the use of the vernacular language in public worship, we also agree that communion in both kinds is the appropriate mode of administration of the Eucharist. In some circumstances, buildings are shared. Now, this points again to this phenomenon that there has been a sharing of buildings, and some would note that again, it's not just in the circumstance of if you don't have um, a building available to you. So whether you agree with this practice or not, whether you think it's a good practice or not, it is something that we are beginning to observe. And it seems to have been going on even in the pontificate of Pope Benedict. I don't know if it was going on in the pontificate of John Paul II. We'd have to look further into it. I do also want to point out this document. This is from the Agreed Statement on the Eucharist Doctrine, 1971, Anglican Roman Catholic Joint Preparatory Commission. Paragraph 12, we believe that we reach substantial agreement on the doctrine of the Eucharist. Although we are all conditioned by the traditional ways in which we have expressed and practiced our Eucharistic faith, we are convinced that if there are any remaining points of disagreement, they can be resolved on the principles established here. We acknowledge a variety of theological approaches within both our communions, but we have seen it our task to find a way of advancing together beyond doctrinal disagreements of the past. It is our hope that in view of these agreements we have reached on Eucharistic faith, this doctrine will no longer constitute an obstacle to the unity we seek. I would just point out with this, however, though there may be agreement with some Anglicans on what the Eucharist is, I don't think that applies to all Anglicans. Certainly some since 1971 have taken a different view, right? And you could even go to Anglican directories and they will note themselves that there is kind of a wide view that they have on the Eucharist, just depending on what, what parish we're talking about. So I just want to point out, yes, some Anglicans may have a view of the Eucharist that is consistent with the Catholic understanding, whereas others may not. So it's not always clear cut. Now, I also want to point to this. Ratzinger's view, and this is where it's actually going to impact the situation with Welby and the liturgy that he celebrated in Rome. Here it's noted on Anglican Orders, Bishop Rowan quotes Cardinal Ratzinger as saying, "We cannot do anything about Leo XIII's words, but there are, however, other ways of looking at things. While the Pope Emeritus does not follow up with any suggestions, he does accept that Anglican Eucharistic services have value. Quote, when an ecclesial community with its ordained ministry, in obedience to the Lord's command, celebrates the Eucharist, the faithful are caught into the heavenly places and there feed on Christ," he says. Now, you may not be aware of that, but that was Ratzinger's view. Ratzinger would say, okay, maybe some of them don't have valid orders, because again, he would say some of them do if they have, orders through the old Catholics. But those who don't, okay, sure, Leo XIII, what he's saying is true, not valid, but he's still saying, but there's still value to what they're doing. They feed on Christ spiritually, though not through the physical means in the way that we do through the dogma of transubstantiation. This would be more like just kind of a spiritualized understanding of the Eucharist, or merely spiritual understanding of feeding on Christ in the Eucharist. So he's saying they still have that. They still have value. They just don't have validity. Now let me point this out. Since you do have this position that many Catholics have put forward, that, okay, perhaps this isn't a valid mass, but it still has value. Is that what's going on with Pope Francis? I don't know. Maybe. But I just gave you an option of what Pope Francis might be thinking. Pope Francis might not necessarily be thinking, well, I think that this is a valid mass, therefore let me grant permission for Welby to celebrate in a Catholic church. That does not logically follow. You see how quick to jump to conclusions some sloppy thinkers are? Do not engage in that kind of sloppy thinking. Think more carefully. It could be that maybe he has something else in mind. Maybe he thinks that it's not valid, but it has value, like Ratzinger, aka Pope Benedict, thought. Maybe. I don't know. Unless Pope Francis tells us exactly what he thinks in this particular situation, I don't know. But I'm giving you a legitimate option of what he might be thinking in light of the fact that his predecessor held to this position. It's probably, I would say, even arguably likely that this is what Pope Francis thinks. Don't know. But even if it isn't, okay. So if he thinks that it's valid, all right. I don't know if Welby has old Catholic orders, but let's say he doesn't. Okay. Worst case scenario just means Pope Francis is wrong. When has that been new to Catholicism? That a pope could be wrong on this? That doesn't translate into his magisterium is invalid, or he teaches heresy in his magisterium, or he teaches error in his magisterium. You see how those are different things? Not the same thing, right? Does not logically follow, right? We can't be this sloppy in our thinking as to come to as to assume that we know what Pope Francis thinks in this situation, and then think that that somehow has bearing on the Catholic position on the magisterium when it doesn't. You have to think through these issues a little bit more carefully, which is why I've just kind of found this whole situation hilarious, because people have been up in arms as if this is somehow a falsification event for the Catholic Church. And I'm just thinking, yeah, no, it's not even remotely close to that. Maybe it's a falsification event for a caricature of what Catholicism is. Maybe that, but it's not a caricature. I'm sorry, it's not a falsification event for what the Catholic position actually is. Let me also point this out, because some people will know Pope Francis gave, I think, a chalice to Welby, something like that. Well, you know what? That's not new. Not new. This is brought up. This is something that we've seen with Paul VI. Paul VI meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Michael Ramsey, in 1966. He gave him an episcopal ring and also a chalice. Now, I know that, your sloppy thinkers among the Sedevacantists will think that, oh, you see, that proves even Paul VI isn't a pope or something like that. But okay, the Sedevacantists are falsified, and their position is falsified by other things, which I've covered extensively on this channel. But I'm speaking more to Catholics who haven't yet embraced the very irrational position of Sedevacantism. And I'll just note that, hey, if you are up in arms with Pope Francis doing this, you also need to be up in arms with Paul VI. That's all. Now, maybe you are. And okay. All right. And maybe you think that it's wrong for him to give him a chalice. Okay. You might be right. You also might be wrong. Because again, with Ratzinger's position saying that even if it's not valid, it still has value, contributing a chalice for that value could be a good thing. That's a prudential question. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. We'll see. Now, let's also touch on this. I've had him, I believe I've had him on the show before, former Anglican Bishop Michael Nazir-Ali, who was recently ordained a priest in the Catholic Church. Well, during his ordination in Catholicism, it was said by Cardinal Nichols, through a prayer that's been in use for a little while now. I think it may go back to Hume. Yeah, it does go back to Hume, the one who said, hey, some of these do have valid orders. You'll note here, it says, During the service, they noted, "We seek to build on the fruitfulness of the priestly ministry you have faithfully exercised." Interesting, right? So there was language in his ordination as a Catholic priest that we build on the fruitfulness of the priestly ministry you have faithfully exercised. And they're talking about his priestly ministry as an Anglican. Again, that could be understood in a couple ways. It could be what Ratzinger was putting forth. But it's just an interesting point to note that we're starting to see a recognition of fruitfulness to ministry among Anglicans. And I'll also point you to this resource because we continue to see further development on the discussion of Leo the 13th in his document. This is put out by the USCCB, Anglican Orders, a report on the evolving context for their evaluation in the Roman Catholic Church. Definitely go and read it. It has some interesting points because it kind of brings up some arguments from the other side, from the Anglicans, where they say, hey, well, the language that Leo the 13th said was absent from the ordination service for Anglicans. And that was part of the grounds that Leo the 13th used to say these orders are null and void. Some Anglicans have pointed out, but hey, that language is also missing in some of the earliest records that we have of Roman ordinations in the first millennium. Just a point worth noting. That doesn't mean that Leo the 13th is wrong. It just means that, hey, we need to have more discussion on this in light of the fact that there are responses that have been made that we need to account for. It sounds like Pope Francis has put into place to not reevaluate or reconsider Leo the 13th's document, but to consider the situation with Anglicanism and some further developments in light of what we have with Leo the 13th. So I imagine we're going to be seeing more coming out from the magisterium on this point. Again, there have been some changes. You do have an introduction of old Catholic orders among some of the Anglicans, and also you have this further theological development that even if the Mass isn't valid, there could still be some fruitfulness and value to it. So I think that also likely accounts for why we're seeing this with Pope Francis granting that permission. But I mean, like I've said, worst case scenario, hey, Pope Francis could be wrong, right? Nothing should be surprising there. I hope you found this beneficial. If you did, please let me know. Put that in the comment section. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Help me grow Reason and Theology to reach other people. Maybe people who haven't heard this and they're freaking out and they think that this is maybe a falsification event for the Catholic Church and they haven't thought through this carefully and they need somebody to just kind of walk them through these issues. Share this with them. Share this video with them where I kind of walked you through this so that we can look at it a little bit more carefully, see what a worst case scenario is, and what does that even mean at the end of the day if it is the worst case scenario. Share this with them if they are confused. All right, that's going to do it. We'll see you later. God bless.
Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy. It engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent. Because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today. For years, Catholics have been made to feel humiliated and ashamed for defending the Pope and the teachings of the Church. This shaming comes not only from non-Catholics, but even from fellow Catholics who mock the Pope and fight against the Church's teachings. Are you sick of being made to feel embarrassed for standing with the Church? I stand with you. For several years, I've been producing content showing why we can be confident in clinging to the Catholic magisterium. If you stand for restoring support for the Church, help me continue this mission of producing apologetic content that defends the magisterium by becoming a supporter on Patreon. The link is below, patreon.com/reason and theology. Christus vincit. Have you ever heard someone say that Pope Francis denied the existence of hell, or Pope Francis worshipped an idol in the Vatican gardens? There are many claims that have been made about Pope Francis for over a decade, and many of them are inaccurate. I've set the record straight in my free ebook called Top 10 Lies About Pope Francis Exposed. Get your free copy today by visiting reason.podia.com.